Hi, I'm so glad you have joined me for this session on Daf Yomi as spiritual practice. I'm Rabbi Megan Doherty. I'm the Hillel Rabbi at Oberlin College in Oberlin, Ohio. And I'm imagining that some of you are coming to this session wondering, what exactly is Daf Yomi? And some of you may be coming to this session wondering, what exactly is a spiritual practice? And my hope is that in this next bit of time together, we can explore both of those questions and see why I think that Daf Yomi really is a really wonderful and enriching spiritual practice. So a little bit about how I came to Daf Yomi, which I'll just say it out loud, is the study of one daf, which is a full folio page, the front and back of one page of Talmud, 1 page a day, until you complete the entire thing. It takes about 7.5 years. And a new cycle began about 1.5 years ago. And a friend of mine, a Hillel colleague, got really excited about bringing Daf Yomi to Hillel. And she had mugs made, and she had a kickoff event at our national convention, and got a bunch of people inspired to just try this practice of learning a page of Talmud a day, from people who had never studied Talmud or rabbinics before to people who were rabbis and Jewish studies scholars. And the Hillel group that still meets every Thursday, which is part of why I have continued with Daf Yomi. And I'm going to make a disclaimer, which is that I will not say that I have studied every page in the original Hebrew and Aramaic in depth each day. Some weeks I wind up skipping days because I'm busy and I catch up on Shabbat. Some weeks I do get really into it and I learn the page, as much as I can inside and really get into all the nitty-gritty, or as much as I can, going as fast as we are. Some weeks I just read the English because I don't have time or energy to engage with the translation project. Some weeks I catch up by reading My Jewish Learning, the summaries they offer, which are wonderful, the little mini essays on a core piece of that day's page. Or some weeks I listen to my podcasts, right? So my Daf Yomi practice, how I engage with it, looks different. And there have been chapters where I have said, I did not get to this. I'm going to mark this as something I just didn't do, and I'll come back to it next time around. But my teacher, Rabbi Lisa Goldstein, who taught me much of what I think I know about Jewish spirituality and mindfulness practice, talked about having the intention to do something. And that sometimes, even if we don't do the thing, having the intention to do the thing is enough. That even if I don't manage to sit on my meditation cushion every day for exactly the amount of time I want, knowing that I intend to do so and that I am reserving a space in my brain and my life for that practice can keep me going and keep me connected to that practice even when this day I just don't have it. That having the intention is sometimes enough to keep you in the flow of the practice. And that, I think, is how I'm approaching Daf Yomi. So I want to offer a quote to sort of frame our conversation from Ilana Kershon, who is a memoirist and a writer and has done, I think at this point, at least 2 cycles of Daf Yomi. And she says, "When I first started learning, I didn't think the Talmud could possibly have anything to say to me personally. But I discovered that when you learn deeply and allow yourself to listen carefully to what the text has to say, you find yourself living against the backdrop of the Talmud, such that the text is a commentary on life and life is a commentary on the text." So part of what we're going to do in this session, I'm going to show you a couple pieces of text that I encountered in my Daf Yomi journey that I don't think I would have encountered in any other context, and share the ways that they have commented on my life, and that my life, or the life of the world, has sort of commented in return. So the first teaching is from Brachot, which is the first tractate of the Talmud in this cycle. Brachot, which means blessings, is full of how do we bless things, and how do we pray, and how do we sort of live our lives in the context of prayer and ritual. And this particular passage I want to share comes from a conversation about death and mourning, and how do we honor the person who has died, how do we connect with and comfort the mourners in this ritual context. And because this text talks about ritual purity and ritual impurity, I want to offer a couple reminders. One of them is that those categories are not about moral choices or sin. They are states of being in which everyone in the biblical and rabbinic world would enter and exit at various moments in life, depending on bodily functions, depending on what was happening in the community. They were just parts of life. So there's no moral judgment here, I don't think, although there are things you can do ritually when you are ritually pure that you are not allowed to do when you are ritually impure. So that's, I think, the context. So the text in Brachot, in this tractate, says, after a funeral, after a burial has taken place, and the community has buried the deceased, and they're all walking the mourner, they're escorting the mourner or mourners back to their home, right? They're accompanying the mourners out of this crisis place of the cemetery, or where this body was buried. And there are two paths, right? There's two paths they can choose from. One which somehow creates impurity. Being near a dead body can create impurity. There's something there on that path which is going to mean that everyone who walked the path is going to have to take a special bath when they get home or at night before they can do anything else, right? It's an inconvenience, and you also shouldn't do it, right? It's not encouraged. So you've got two pathways, and here in the highlighted text, right? If the mourner chooses to walk on the path that's pure, then all the escort, the community, follows the mourner on that path. And if the mourner chooses to walk on the impure path, right, by the way that's going to make everyone's life very inconvenient for the next 12 or 24 hours, all of those participants go with the mourner on that path in order to show the mourner respect. And the Gemara asks, the Talmud asks, right, this is like, why would you do this? And the answer, right, there's neither wisdom or understanding against the Lord, which I understand here to mean sometimes what our knowledge and instincts tell us to do might not be what God wants us to do. And then a few lines later, the Gemara, the sort of anonymous redactor, editor of this text, comes to say, here's another thing we should know, right? Come in here. Great is human dignity because it overrides a prohibition in the Torah. And so for me, there's something really powerful here, that the instruction here in the Talmud is that when we are faced with human suffering, right, or when we are faced with the question of honoring someone's human dignity or not honoring it, we choose to accompany the person in their suffering. We choose to value the dignity of the other human in front of us over our desire to not be in an impure status, right? Our desire to not maybe have to, do the processes of becoming, of getting rid of our unpureness, right? We have to value the human beings in front of us over our own convenience, maybe even our own status, that there is something more important about caring for each other and caring for people when they are vulnerable than making sure that we are always protected all the time. And as someone who works on a college campus, I think a lot about what it means to walk with someone on their impure path. And I think that all of us can be a little braver in how we choose to go to meet people, wherever it is they are, in order to respect them and honor them and accompany them on their own journeys. So that's one learning that I would never have found if I had not been reading the Talmud page by page every day. Another piece of the experience of Daf Yomi in the 21st century, in the year 2021, is the amazing number and kind of community that you can be part of. So some people I know have a chavruta, a study partner, who they meet with every day to check in or learn together that day's page of the Talmud. I'd already talked about my weekly Talmud group where, a rotating number of us, we don't always come every week, but that space is there every week. And we teach each other and we ask each other questions and we sort of hold each other accountable to this practice of Daf Yomi. And that is an amazing, important community. And then there's global communities. Like the idea of Daf Yomi itself was designed to create a global community of people who are learning the same thing, but we have social media. We have, there's a Daf Yomi hashtag on Twitter, and there is a Facebook group called Meme Yomi, where people who are studying Daf Yomi create memes around the content that they're learning. It's amazing. So here's one meme from the Daf Yomi Facebook group from Psachim, from the Tractate of Talmud that deals with Passover. And this particular conversation that that they're summarizing in this image is a conversation about, is beer okay to say Kiddush with or make Havdalah with? Can we use it as a cup over which we bless? And the answer the rabbis come to is, like, there's some rabbis who are like, okay, you can in these circumstances with this kind of beer, but there's a fair number of rabbis who are like, no, beer is gross. Like in Babylonia, beer is what the peasants drink and we're not peasants, or it just tastes bad and wine tastes better. So we have this meme format. You'll see these two arms wrestling each other, or maybe they're agreeing with each other, linked together. And the thing they agree on is this beer is disgusting. And one group of people who thinks beer is disgusting are Europeans drinking American beer. And one group of people who thinks beer is disgusting is Chazal, which is an insider term, or an acronym, a Jewish acronym for the rabbis, for the wise, our wise ones, may their memories be for a blessing, right? And so the rabbis of the Talmud. And so this is a meme format that gets used for many, many other things, but I love that here in the 21st century, we have this connection, we have this ability to take these concepts and these conversations that we're wrestling with and put them in these formats that are maybe more familiar or more accessible, or a vernacular that is wider than just our own. So maybe in 100 years, this image and ones like it might be included in the next edition of the Koran translation of the Talmud. So I want to share one more text that I stumbled across in my Daf Yomi practice. And it's from Eruvin, which is a notoriously hard and complicated tractate in the Talmud. It is about where can you go on Shabbat, and how far can you go, and how do you figure out what those boundaries are. And so it has lots of geometry and lots of math and lots of spatial things that I am neither a math person nor a spatial person, and I found Eruvin really, really, really hard. And I stuck with it because I had a community of people who were holding me accountable to it. And I stuck with it because buried in it are gems, are teachings that I would, again, never have found otherwise. So this teaching from Eruvin, the question that is at stake is, if a parent, if a mother has created an eruv, created a Shabbat boundary for themselves, is their child able to sort of function within that same boundary, or do they need to make their own? So the first thing we have is, it says, okay, a child who needs his mother can go out, can like exist within their mother's eruv, but one who does not need his mother may not go out based on her eruv, that he has to make his own, she has to make her own. And before we dive any deeper, I just want to lift up that the Talmud is not a text that spends a lot of time on mothers and children. That's not a relationship that the almost entirely male cohort of rabbis having this conversation was particularly interested in investigating. So it's really striking to me that here we have the mother as the sort of parent whose ability to create an eruv or that includes their children is at stake. So just noting that there's a mother there. And also this is a question, right? What does it mean to need your mother, right? That's a really subjective category. So of course the rabbis are going to try to make it a little more objective or make it clearer. And also you'll notice that the kind of mitzvah involved switches, although it's the same conversation, that they're talking earlier about the boundary of Shabbat, and in this next conversation it's talking about sukkah, about building a sukkah, about being like who has this obligation to build and live in their sukkah. But it's still the same question about if a child can be included in their parents' observance or creation of a space in which a mitzvah happens. So Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish said, a child who wakes from sleep and does not call mother is obligated in this mitzvah, right? So a child who can wake up and not call for their mother is therefore a child who does not need his mother or her mother. And so they have to make their own, they're responsible for their own mitzvot. They're beginning to be responsible for their own mitzvot. But then the Gemara, right, the sort of anonymous response of Talmud says, wait, can you really say, can it enter your mind that every child who cries out mother is someone who needs their mother, right? Like, we all call for our moms. Like, how can that category be so wide and so inclusive, right? Much older children also call out to their mothers for assistance when they wake up. So rather, we're going to define it like this. The halakha, the law, is going to include any child who wakes up and does not persistently call mother, mother, right? So if, right, you wake up and you don't keep calling, you can call once and you're still considered obligated in for your own sukkah and your own eruv. But if you keep calling, then okay, like then you need your mother if you keep calling. So that's a pretty powerful statement, right? This idea that what defines a certain kind of maturity or a certain kind of growing up isn't not calling out for your mom, because some of us as grown-ups might wake up from a nightmare and say, Mom, and then remember that our mother is in a different state or no longer with us, and then we soothe ourselves. Or we might be 4 years old and wake up and say, Mom, and then remember that our parents want us to work on staying in bed at night by ourselves, and so we don't call out again. We turn to our stuffed animal and we snuggle our big bear and we go back to sleep, right? So so maybe that kid also is obligated. And then we have Rashi, who is our commentator sort of par excellence on the Talmud. And Rashi says, but each one who wakes from sleep and does not call mommy, mommy, right? That's our quote from before, right? The one who doesn't cry out until she gets up and comes to him, this is the one who does not need his mother, right? So if you don't keep calling until your mom comes for you, then maybe you don't need your mother. And I was reading this last summer, Eruvin was most of last year, or a lot of last year, last summer and fall, when the world, right, when our country was in the middle of a really intense reckoning about racism and in this country and police brutality and violence. And we all had the opportunity to see the video of George Floyd and his death. And I read this and I thought immediately of that moment, which Lene O'Neill lifts up in her essay that I have quoted here. "Mama, mama," Floyd calls out. "My knee, my neck, I'm through," the dying man says. A call to your mother is a prayer to be seen. Floyd's mother died 2 years ago, but he used her as a sacred invocation. And there's something there about the way that all of us, or those of us who are blessed with a relationship with our mothers, allows us to think of them as our calming and soothing and rescuing presences, that when we are in moments of extreme suffering, of anguish, of agony, of being pushed to our limits, that we call for our mothers, that we want to be soothed and taken care of and held. And so I see the rabbis in George Floyd and George Floyd in the rabbis, of that knowledge and that truth about human nature and the human experience. And so I see here, right, the Talmud speaking to our lives, and our lives, the life of the world speaking back to the Talmud. And to me, that this is an Eruvin. This truth, this connection I found struggling through a challenging and kind of boring and frustrating tractate. And I found this kind of amazing moment of humanity, of real deep humanity. And I think about the practice of studying Talmud every day, that if I bring to it, curiosity and openness and acceptance and affection and love. Those are the qualities I try to bring to my own thoughts when I'm sitting on a meditation cushion. Those are the qualities I try to bring to my interactions with other people in the world. If I bring those same qualities to my daily interactions with rabbis of the Talmud, that is a practice. That is my spiritual practice of exercising those heart muscles so I can be touched by the conversation that's been happening for 2,000 years and bring my own self to be part of it. So I'm going to close us out with some words from Adam Kirsch, who is another writer who has spent time in the Daf Yomi trenches, and this is one of the reflections, from one reflection he had on his experience. One would expect the rabbis to have precise rules for ritual and religious actions, and they do. But they also tell us how we should tie our shoes in the morning, first put on the right shoe, then the left, then tie the left shoe, and finally tie the right one, and how often married men should have sex with their wives, twice a week for donkey drivers, while scholars preoccupied with Torah can make do with once a month. They lay down rules for business, buying real estate, loaning money, appointing an agent, and for a healthy diet, what foods are good for people with various illnesses, and how to behave at the table. You should never pass a cup over a loaf of bread. But the ideal Jewish life for the rabbis involves more than obeying God's law at every moment. Above all, it means studying that law. And so for me, the practice of Daf Yomi is a deep practice of being part of a more than 2,000-year-old conversation about how do we engage with and think about and wrestle with God's laws and the Jewish customs and Jewish teachings? And how do we bring them into our own lives? And that is a spiritual practice. Thank you so much for being part of this session. I wish you all well.